Thanks for joining me today for another episode of Hunt Hunt Feast. Today, I want to answer the question, what is insulin resistance and how can you reverse it? So I guess that's two questions, really, technically, but both worth asking. I could tell you about it, but if I don't tell you how to fix it, what's the point? I mean, education's good. A lot of people don't understand insulin resistance. Fewer know how to reverse it. So let's get into it. It's not easy to understand. I'll explain it as simply as possible, as well as the steps to reverse it. But it's particular. There's some differences to the type of tissue that's resistant. So don't stay with me. I don't want to lose you because I'm getting technical on it. But in other words, between fat, muscle, and liver, it looks a little bit different. It can include the brain too, but with increased risk of dementia. But we're primarily going to focus on fat, muscle, liver, or liver, both visceral fat, and a little bit of how that affects the organs, but specifically the liver. So it can be a little different, and it does matter. It does matter in the sense of understanding the mechanism and how and the steps you have to take to reverse it or prevent it. And then when people discuss it, you just want to know what they're talking about, right? People throw the word around a lot, and as they should. We need more education on this, but it's the beginning of most diseases that we face in the modern world, right? Obesity, obviously type 2 diabetes, right? But also heart disease, certain cancers, fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, hypertension, some types of dementia. Okay, it's not the only cause for dementia or certain cancers, but it definitely plays a role in some of them. It's estimated that over 80% of adults in the US have chronic insulin resistance, somewhere between 80 and 90%. That's a lot. That's a huge number. 80, so let's just say 85%, right? Would be really close. So how do you know if you have insulin resistance? So there's a few symptoms that can make it kind of obvious. For instance, if you're fasting blood sugar, so if you do the finger prick thing, or you do a blood test, you get a. But if you're actually just stick with fasting blood sugar, where normal is a range, say somewhere between high 60s or 70 and 90, you might push up towards 100. If you get past 110 consistently fasting, you definitely got some insulin resistance. So if you're over 110, fasted insulin resistance, then consistently, something could throw that up, that like stress and so forth, but you've got some insulin resistance to deal with. If your triglyceride to HDL ratio, okay, so that's triglycerides divided by your HDL number from a blood test, is over 1.5. Now, some will tell you 2, but I think 1.5 is a better marker to let you know it's time to get busy, time to do something about it. I actually saw a study posted at the American, or referenced, I should say, referenced at the American Diabetes Association, the ADA. It showed a triglyceride to HDL ratio over 1.3 was an indication of small, dense LDL, which is the LDL that's most associated with heart disease, right? So that means that LDL is a carrier, right? It's a protein. It's a lipoprotein that carries cholesterol, true cholesterol. It carries triglycerides. It carries fat-soluble vitamins and antioxidants. So it's very helpful, beneficial. We need it. We couldn't live without it. But the small, dense ones tend to be carrying triglycerides rather than a lot of cholesterol. If it was mostly carrying the vitamins and the cholesterol and the antioxidants, it'd be a large, fluffy LDL. Triglycerides tend to make it very dense. And those are the ones that tend to get caught in the cracks and fissures, maybe cause some cracks and fissures of your endothelial tissue, right, of your arterial tissue, and tend to be inflammatory, especially if they're oxidized, because the fats that we eat, right, tend to be how should we say, polyunsaturated. I don't get too down this rabbit hole, but polyunsaturated, so more easily oxidized, right, rather than saturated fats. But anyway, the small dense ones tend to be most associated with that triglyceride HDL ratio over 1.3. So that means you need lower triglycerides, higher HDL if you want to improve that, get it down to like closer to 1, right? So we're going to raise HDL, lower triglycerides. And really, if you have more than, say, 20 pounds of fat to lose, it's likely you're insulin resistant, especially if you also have hypertension. High insulin levels will cause high blood pressure, cause the kidneys to hang on to more sodium, which causes the fluid retention and increased blood sugar, as well as preventing fat loss. If you have high insulin levels, you're not going to be able to access fat. It's a hormone, it's a fat storage or energy storage hormone. So if you're going to store, you can't be releasing it unless you don't want to. That's a hormone dysregulation, which we will talk about, because that is also can play a role in insulin resistance. That can certainly be something that's happening where you're releasing fuel, usually glucose, and not storing the fat. Not good, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Primarily, high insulin keeps you from releasing fat because you're busy storing it. But otherwise, and again, with the high blood pressure, if you didn't have the higher insulin level, your body could release that sodium, eliminate that sodium and fluid as needed to control your blood pressure. But it's the insulin that drives, not salt, it's the insulin that drives retention of the sodium in the kidneys, which brings on the high blood pressure, which of course leads to heart disease, right? So a great indicator that most people aren't aware of, including many doctors that just aren't familiar with it, don't know how to read it. There's a lot of, say, blurry lines, a lot of unknowns around the scale and like what ideal scale is. It's hard to find. It's hard to find much, actually, you start searching for it. But it's called a fasting insulin level. You can request it on a standard blood test, a special one, just your typical lipid hormone. You can have CRPs and thyroid, your typical blood test you can get, or you can just request it on its own. But a fasting insulin, worth requesting with every blood test to track it, because it's an early indicator of insulin resistance, essentially. So that fasting insulin level will start going up before your blood sugar will. Insulin will go up to keep blood sugar under control. So before your blood sugar is consistently over 110, what's been happening in the background is that your fasting insulin levels have been going up in an effort to keep blood sugar under control and in normal ranges, right? So you want your fasting insulin to be 8 or lower, ideally. Below 5 is awesome. That would be your goal, is to do what you can to get it under 5. If you're over 8, you want to address it ASAP. 5 to 8 is kind of like your warning zone. Like, you're probably doing okay, but you might be moving the wrong direction, and you want to correct a little bit to get it under 5. 5 would be stellar. Under 5 would be stellar. So go for, just to give you some frame of reference, because again, it's hard to find ideal ranges, and you start searching around, you're going to see probably some variation in opinion on that. But as I said before, insulin resistance can look a little different with each type of tissue. And it often develops in a succession, not all at once, not like all tissues are insulin resistant at one time. Insulin resistance in the muscle is simply that the muscle says, hey, I'm full, no more fuel needed. I can't take any more glycogen, and actually even protein. I mean, insulin delivers protein and glycogen or glucose to the muscle. The glucose is stored as glycogen. The protein, of course, is to restore structure, tissue on a regular basis. Even if you're not trying to build, right, so to speak, it helps just fix it, right? As we recycle 250 grams of protein daily, okay, we need protein being delivered to tissues just to keep that tissue healthy. If you're exercising or doing anything with creating stress on those muscles, you definitely need the protein being delivered. So it's important. But insulin resistance, the muscle basically says, hey, can't do it. So in relation to the glucose, muscles being your primary place of storing dietary glucose, hydration. So whether you eat a potato or a piece of fruit or so anything with glucose, insulin's going to try to stuff about 80% of what you eat, give or take, in your muscles. If they're insulin sensitive to take it, if you're not insulin sensitive, it's got to go somewhere, right? So where does that glucose end up? Many times in fat cells. Can't go to muscles. It's got to take it somewhere. It's got to get it out of the bloodstream, or the blood sugar is going to go up to a dangerous level. So it's trying to save your life. You can't have all that blood sugar staying in the bloodstream, or that sugar, glucose staying in the bloodstream. So it's got to stuff it in fat cells. But if those insulin receptors withdraw off the muscle cell, again, you're missing out on a great place to deposit glucose, because that's readily available energy in those muscles. You have those muscles full of glycogen, so you can be active and just, not store it as fat, right? So that's why it's so important to have some activity, I believe, with muscles, to empty those muscles fairly regularly, all of them. So when insulin is prescribed to type 2 diabetics, for instance, it's to create a larger stimulus to shove that blood sugar into the muscle, to get that blood sugar out of the bloodstream. It's like, you get a kind of a resistance to it. You get used to the amount that's normally available in your body. And then your body stops being able to raise that amount. That's when the fasting insulin levels start coming up. And at some point, you need help. You need extra insulin to try to shove that blood sugar into the muscle. But again, and those, again, should be the largest receptacles of muscles, should be the largest receptacles of blood sugar. And they can, muscles, your whole body, muscles throughout the whole body. So all of them together might hold about, give or take, depending on the body, of course, on average, about 1,200 calories. So only about 400 grams of glucose. Now, if you think about, many people, especially in the US, will eat that much sugar in a day, which is crazy. I'm not saying I've never done it, okay? Which could come from bread, starches, as well as sugars and fruits and stuff like that. So we, many times, if you haven't used those muscles, used up the energy in the muscles, they're not empty. There's not 400 grams of glucose space available for storage. That's why it ends up being stored as fat, because you haven't used it up. Even if it's not insulin resistant, if they're full, they're full. So there's really not that much. There's not 400 grams of available. And when you think about, most workouts might burn off 300 or 400 calories, honestly. So in addition to what you're already normally burning, but we're talking about what you burn off emptying those muscles. So your heart's going to burn calories. Your liver, your brain, heart, and kidneys burn up 65% of your calories. Your workouts and your muscles, really maybe 10% of your total calories burned in a day, honestly. So yeah, there's not that much room. And muscles hold glycogen just for that muscle. In other words, if you go out for a run, you're really only using the glycogen that's in those leg muscles that you're using. The glycogen stored in your arms, your back, are not going to be diverted out of those muscles to your leg muscles. So you've got to use those muscles specifically in order to use up the glycogen. Make sense? So blood sugar, for instance, if you're out exercising and your blood sugar starts to go down, you're using up the glycogen in those legs, or whatever you're doing in a particular muscle, they're not going to release blood sugar from those muscles, instead back in the bloodstream to keep your normal blood sugar up for the rest of your organs and so forth. That's the job of the liver. The liver regulates blood sugar. The liver only holds about 100 grams of glycogen, so about another 400 calories. So in total, you've got, 1,200 calories in muscles, 400 calories in the liver to store glycogen. Again, many times they're not full. I mean, they're not totally empty. They're pretty full. So you really don't have a lot of room to store excess glucose that you're not using in the moment, right? Not that we need some room for that, but we're not going to have the full amount there. So, and if you've eaten recently, like shortly before workout, or you take some kind of pre-workout which has glucose in it, or some kind of carb in it, then that will also take the place of stored fuel. So if stored fuel in the muscle or stored fuel in the liver, if it's fresh in your bloodstream, you're going to use that first for those needs. For the you're basically replacing stored, as opposed to going in fasted, where your blood sugar levels are normal. You have your normal whatever spot your muscles are, whether half empty or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Topping off those muscles is replacing fuel that you normally be burning from those muscles. Okay, you get what I'm saying. The liver will release glucose for activity during that time, and intense activity. So very intense, like interval training, sprinting, an intense kind of a fast-paced weightlifting, intense, really just intense sat that will cause the liver to release enough glucose that would actually raise your blood sugar above what we call normal. Like if you go to 110 or 120. If you've ever worn a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, and checked it while you're working out, or even during a stressful moment, like in traffic, or during a stressful meeting, or you're giving a speech, presentation, some sort of argument, your blood sugar levels can go up from that without eating anything. Just the stress. It's cortisol and adrenaline go up. It releases glucose from the liver, right? And it's intentionally to supply energy for a workout. Or if you're in a fight or flight situation where if you want to go back 100 years ago, or take you to another environment than we have in our, your typical Western, go to work, come home, eat kind of thing, where you might have a predator after you, and suddenly you're in a stressful environment, you've got to move and run. It's flooding you with some energy to get you for your survival. That's how it works. So, and yes, some intramuscular fat is broken down, fatty acids in the bloodstream, which is all energy that you would use, and because you generally split your energy use between fat and glycogen on a spectrum. And that would depend on blood sugar levels, available fuel, the intensity of it, hormone levels. There's a lot of other factors in there. Your metabolic health, it could be a 60-40 split, the 80-20, either way, like real intense activity for that set could be 90% coming from glucose, 10% coming from fat. Whereas if you're walking, if you're insulin sensitive and you're hormonally balanced, and you're just out for a walk, it might be 70% fat and 30% glucose. There's always a fuel split. The important thing is to make sure when you're insulin sensitive that you are metabolically flexible and that you can go back and forth or have a healthy mix of those as needed, burning fat and glucose. Most people lose the ability to burn fat, but there's mechanisms, there's, the efficiency of it can be lost if you're insulin resistant and you have been accessing fat storage. Because your insulin levels are high and you can't release as much of it. So it's just, there's a benefit. Well, working out can improve insulin sensitivity. Now you don't need insulin to deliver fuel to the muscles during exercise, but it does empty, as I mentioned before, empty those muscles. So it stimulates the action of bringing fuel in there, but it does empty them to make them ready so that when you do eat, they'd be more receptive to insulin bringing fuel. This is why I do a lot of fasted workouts. I think they're much better for improving metabolic flexibility, insulin sensitivity. And I mean, fasted, usually mine are like at least 12 hours, maybe sometimes 14 or 16 hours since I last ate my workout. I think you need at least 4 if you want to improve what I'm talking about, if that's a goal of yours. Okay, if you're just thinking about growth and performance, particular sport, if you're a young athlete or competitive athlete, and all you're concerned that you're not worried about insulin sensitivity or leanness, then yeah, eating closer to the workout, eating frequently, performance, you want fuel. If you're talking about improving metabolic health and maybe some weight loss, leanness, fat loss, then you want to consider going to a workout without, at least 4 hours since you eaten. Now, not to say you depend on exercise for weight loss, but to improve the efficiency of fat burning, improve the efficiency of having that metabolic flexibility where you can flip back and forth and improve insulin sensitivity. But you want to be able to use both fuel types as needed, whichever one's best, not have one blocked or inefficient because you're not used to training it. So think of fast workouts not as a way to lose more weight during that workout, but to improve your body's ability to access and mobilize fat for fuel. It's a training mechanism, right? It's a training. It's training your body to use that more efficiently, so that as you go about your day, throughout your day, you're more insulin sensitive. You use fat more efficiently. So that you don't need glucose to go for a walk, as much glucose to go for a walk or just run your errands or walk up some stairs. You can rely more on stored fat, which you have a lot more of than glucose. You have a lot more than 1,200 or 1,600 calories worth of glucose in your body in fat, right? A lot more fat than glucose. So that would make sense to use that fuel source for more often and be much more efficient at it than your average person. As you know, 80+% are insulin resistant. So that's why you don't need that much glucose in your diet, even if you work out regularly. You just don't use that much of it. You can't store that much of it. That's a better way to say it. It really isn't much room for it. 500 grams total. And again, that's usually not completely empty, is it? Especially if weight loss is your goal. Now, let's talk about insulin resistance of the fat cell. It's a bit different, much more dangerous, in my opinion. Usually happens after insulin resistance at the muscle. Fat cells will usually just keep taking on more fat, as we all know, right? They'll keep, bring it on in. Let's start. We'll just get bigger and bigger. Until they can't hold anymore. Now, some people have very healthy fat cells that can easily duplicate and create more fat cells before they get so full that they stop taking them to get insulin resistant. Okay, that's more rare. Those people are not common. They're very high, we call fat threshold. They just keep basically the fat cells duplicate, and before they get so full they get sick and inflamed, they create more fat cells. So the fat keeps going in there, and they just put on a lot of fat, but they may not be that insulin resistant. Like if you look at their blood work, it looks pretty good, considering how overweight they might be. Most people's fat cells get so full they get inflamed and they get insulin resistant to keep more fat from being deposited in there, and the fat starts spilling out into the bloodstream as they get fat, as those fat cells get full and sick. The free fatty acids are spilling out in the bloodstream, which is a sign of insulin resistance in many cases. Those fats usually end up being stored in the visceral area, or so under the muscle in the trunk, which causes the expansion of the waist. We talk about central obesity. That's what that is. Many times it ends up in the liver. You store in the liver. So you have fatty liver disease, and around other organs. So you have just another dysfunction, more dysfunction, I should say, of organs from that fat being deposited. It throws off their ability to function correctly. Like liver, heart, pancreas, kidneys, right? The inflammation comes from these inflammatory proteins that develop in the sick fat cell. So during the inflammation, they start. It's a sign of it. It's inflammation, so that when that fat spills out, those inflammatory proteins also spill out into other places in the body, causing inflammation there. Not good. Basically, spreading inflammation and fat everywhere. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? It is. It's terrible. So that personal fat threshold I mentioned, for some very rare people, it's very high. They can duplicate fat. For most people, it's kind of like they get, the fat cells get sick. For some people, it's very low. And their fat cells get inflamed and sick, start spilling out the fat early on. They hit that limit. And then so that means that fat goes to their visceral area and to their organs before they maybe get obese, before they're considered obese or overweight. They're really overweight. They just have thickness around the middle, but they still have thin arms and legs and don't have a lot of ability fat anywhere else. That tends to be seen more so. It's not a hard, fast rule. This is not like, hey, if you're this descent, it looks this way. But people of Asian descent often have a greater number of likelihood of having a lower fat threshold than people from, say, Northern Europe or from South America. That includes India as well. You see that with India, where you have maybe a higher prevalence of central obesity, like I said, weight around the middle, even insulin resistance, pre-diabetic diabetes, which they're seeing in India, China, right, even the Middle East, but not as much obesity as we have in the U.S. So someone with a higher fat threshold, they get obese first, or overweight or obese first. You see more fat around under the arms and the chest and the legs, neck, chin, right? And then it starts going to, as that limit is hit, it starts going to the central, like the trunk, right, around the trunk area, the whole visceral area. And then the insulin resistance begins in the organs. So you kind of see what I mean. It can vary. It doesn't all have to look the same. You don't have to be overweight, how we see it, how we think of overweight, in order to have insulin resistance because of that fat, based on the personal fat threshold of that individual. So they may not have much subcutaneous fat, but they'll see fatty liver and the signs of metabolic disease. So it's not always cut and dry, right? You don't have to. Again, they can have that without becoming obese. In the way we see it, but we call it central obesity. So it's right around the middle. So that fat accumulating around the visceral area around those organs is much more metabolically dangerous than subcutaneous fat. Subcutaneous fat is it does have some hormonal impact with estrogen and increasing estrogen and other things, leptin resistance. But it doesn't have as much of an impact on insulin, glucagon, blood sugar dysregulation as fat that's in the visceral area and it's affecting the liver specifically. So let's get to the liver. Insulin resistance at the liver, as I mentioned before, liver manages our blood sugar as a response to insulin and the other hormone glucagon, which both coming from the pancreas. And then stress and cortisol, adrenaline can affect glucose release as well. So insulin comes from the beta cells of the pancreas, you probably know that. Glucagon comes from the alpha cells in the pancreas. So we're going to talk a little more about that in a minute. But again, stress, so a workout, playing a sport, stressful meeting, an argument, that can all raise blood sugar because of the cortisol and adrenaline, okay? Actually, when we wake up in the morning, you get a little boost of cortisol and adrenaline, even before you've had your coffee. It's just natural. So it wakes you up in the morning, gets your heart rate up, makes you ready to feel like waking up, but also gives you a little bit of a glucose release from the liver. So, it's like breakfast. It's like a blood sugar breakfast. You have to eat. You got it. It just happens. That's why many people see if they're testing their blood sugar and they're having some insulin resistance, they might see it's called the dawn effect with really high blood sugar in the morning. It's just, it's part of that. That's oversimplifying, but it's normal to have a bit of a blood sugar increase in the morning. Okay. As our body's trying to wake us up from sleeping. It's part of our circadian rhythm. But increased insulin levels tells the liver to stop releasing glucose and start storing sugar, either as glycogen in the liver, so it holds like 100 grams, or fat, which can hold a lot more than 100 grams, right? So insulin tells it to store. It's a storage hormone. So if it's going to tell it to store, it's going to stop releasing the glucose in the bloodstream because it's saying, hey, we've got enough out here in the bloodstream. We're trying to get rid of it. Stop releasing glucose. When insulin is low, glucagon actually is higher. It goes up, right? They balance each other out to tell the liver to release more glycogen. So to break down glycogen that's stored in the liver, releases glucose in the bloodstream as needed to stabilize blood sugar or to keep up with whatever stress you're going through at the moment, right? Again, it stores up, like I said, 100 grams, 400 calories. The problem with the storing fat in the liver is the more it stores, the more sickly it becomes. Now, if it does need more, let's say liver glycogen gets really low and you're fasting, you haven't been eating, and that would probably take more than 24-hour fast, right? It'll signal to break down protein to make more glucose. Okay, that could be dietary protein from the gut, it could be tissues from muscle. We're always recycling protein. So that's normal. That's how we regulate our glucose. So people saying, "Oh, eat too much protein is going to raise your blood sugar." No. Your body's only going to protein is not going to tell your body. Insulin is released to manage protein, to store it. Okay. To some degree, higher with carbs, less with just protein and fat. There's not like a fine, like really delineated lines between exactly how, and really it's really personal to the system it's in, to some degree. But generally speaking, protein and carbs, higher insulin response. Protein and fat, like naturally occurring fat, less of an insulin response. Glucagon can work and manage it. It's going to be less of a flip of insulin, like not as high and not as low a duration. But breaking down protein to be used to fill the liver with glycogen, refuel the liver with glycogen, is normal. It's how our bodies are meant to work. It's not something to be afraid of. So eating low protein to avoid insulin spikes, that's more about food meal frequency than how much protein you're eating. Protein's not going to make you insulin resistant. Will it throw you out of ketosis? For a moment, maybe. I don't know. It's not going to cause a blood sugar surge. Okay. So no, I don't think it would affect your body's ability to burn fat significantly compared to the benefits you get from taking in a significant amount of protein that your body will use to break that and to fuel that liver glycogen. There's nothing wrong with liver glycogen. It's very important. Now, yes, when liver glycogen gets low, it'll increase ketone production and breakdown of fat. Right. But you still, if your goal is weight loss, don't get so hung up on the ketone being high. Some ketone production is good to let you know, hey, I'm burning fat. Higher, it doesn't necessarily mean you're, better or more effective. if it means you're undercutting the proteins that you need. I hate to go down that rabbit hole. The keto people, please don't get mad at me. It's just not something to fear. So, okay, let's get back to insulin resistance, which with the liver, again, it means it's not storing the glucose. So if you're not storing the glucose from the bloodstream, what's going on? Blood sugar is not being reduced. Okay, so you have higher blood sugar because it has nowhere to deposit it. The muscle's probably insulin resistant already. The fat's probably already insulin resistant, maybe. But if it can't go in the liver, and the liver's not taking that blood sugar out, then you've got higher blood sugar. Makes sense, right? Then you have the storage expecting. And if it's insulin resistant, it doesn't get the signal to stop breaking down glycogen. So it continues to break down the glycogen to be released as glucose. So not only is it not taking blood sugar out of the bloodstream, it's still adding it, increasing your blood sugar. See the problem with insulin resistance? Very dangerous. Increased blood sugar, your body's going to release more insulin to deal with it, to try to shove the insulin into the resistant tissues. So you see why the elevated blood sugar occurs, and then the hyperinsulinemia is being developed, if it isn't already, but it continues to develop, right? So fasting insulin at that point would already be elevated, which is as a precursor to managing, to trying to keep that blood sugar down, right? Trying to shove it in. So fasting insulin is going up to deal with it. And the more resistant your body is to it, the more tissues you have insulin resistant, the higher your natural insulin level is going to go. The fasting insulin is going to go. And it even tends to stay high in a fat. Yes, somewhat transient. Yes, it does fluctuate a little bit, but tends to stay high even in a fasted state. So your fasting insulin, it would be much higher when you eat. But when you, in a fasted state, say 8 to 10 hours, it's still going to be elevated. That's not good. That's when we know there's a problem. And a lifestyle of frequent meals and snacks is typical with this problem, right? So their greatest fasted period is often overnight, and they might be snacking right before they go to bed, eating as soon as they get up because they're feeling hungry from the dysregulation of hormones. So their longest fasted period might be 8 to 10 hours. That's it. And then they start eating, and they're eating every 2 or 3 hours. That's going to keep your insulin levels up and continue to raise and keep your blood sugar up. And you're getting insulin resistant. You got nowhere for that to go. You're going to try to store this fat in the liver, in the organs, in the visceral area, as well as subcutaneous fat until that threshold's met. And as blood sugar and insulin levels go up and down, the hormones, like as I mentioned, leptin, but leptin and ghrelin become dysregulated. Leptin makes you feel satisfied or full. You feel like, hey, I've had enough, I'm good. You become resistant to leptin. Not good, is it? If you're resistant to the hormone that tells you when you feel satisfied, we can keep happening. You keep eating, you keep feeling hungry. Ghrelin is a hormone that stimulates the feeling of hunger. But will gurgle in your stomach? That's from ghrelin. It's just a hormone response. Despite the fact that you might be carrying around thousands of calories of fat, like most people are, and that's not, I mean, most of us should have thousands of calories of fat, right? So you're going to, I mean, just you have your fat calories outnumber your glycogen. You should be able to use those for energy, but if your insulin levels are high and you can't reach them, you're going to be hungry and not burning fat. Right? Can't be released, can't be accessed. You're hungry, but you're overweight and you can't get to that fat. It's locked away. It's literally locked away. You can't reach it the majority of time or at the level that you need it to maintain normal energy, and so you're hungry. It's hormonal. And it comes from, like I said, frequent meals, frequent eating. When blood sugar crashes, so like you eat, goes up, insulin's high, it goes up, brings it crashing down, ghrelins released to encourage more eating, and you're on that vicious cycle, right? Every 2 or 3 hours, like a roller coaster. It's going up and down, and when you come down, trigger hunger, eat again, goes back up. crashing down, eat again, goes back up, driven by hormones. And the fatty liver from the insulin resistance of the liver adds to the problem because you're pumping out blood sugar. And as fat builds up in the visceral area, of course, makes the waist bigger. And it also goes to the other organs, like I mentioned, the heart, kidneys, pancreas, causing disease and functional problems with those organs as well. So in the pancreas, as I mentioned, you have the alpha and the beta cells, alpha releasing glucagon, the beta releasing insulin. And you have a dysregulation of the signaling between those cells. So the insulin and glucagon release doesn't balance, doesn't work. Because when insulin goes up, glucagon is supposed to stop. When insulin goes down, glucagon is supposed to be released. So if you get insulin resistance at the alpha cell, we have a lot of fat in the pancreas and it's blocking signaling. Well, when the insulin goes up, the glucagon is supposed to be decreased or shut off. The alpha cell doesn't get the signal, and it keeps releasing glucagon. So we have a similar problem like we had with the liver, where we have high insulin levels, fat storage, right? Or fat, trying to handle that blood sugar. Glucagon's still going, so it's signaling release more blood sugar, release more sugar into the bloodstream, compounding the problem from the liver and reinforcing it. So your blood sugar levels going up. If you can still store fat, your fat storage. If not, you've got it spilling out back to the visceral area, or recycling back to be stored in the visceral area. So more organ dysfunction. There's actually a study, so I mentioned alcohol, I mentioned in the last podcast. With alcohol, binge drinking actually affects the same dysregulation through the hypothalamus, and it's signaling to the liver in that you have high insulin levels and glucose being released at the same time. That's why alcohol can create that visceral fat, because it can signal dysregulate the signal between when one's supposed to be shut off and glucose supposed to be shut off, and it's time to store, but we don't have storage going on, and we have glucose being pumped out, and so visceral fat, right? Well, alcohol creates so many triglycerides because your liver is rapidly trying to like pack up this fat and the sugar that's coming in and put it in triglycerides and send it up the rest of the body to be stored. We have those high triglycerides again, which you begin with, causing that problem, insulin resistance. But so it's a vicious cycle, right? Leading to weight gain in most people, increased insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver. As I mentioned, the hypertension, all of that, more inflammation, more lifestyle diseases. So this is why it's much more of a problem, this visceral fat, than subcutaneous fat. In fact, it's just under the skin, the arms and legs, right? It's under the muscle. It's around the core of the body, the trunk of the body. It's just a hormonal nightmare. Well, let's answer the question: how do we reverse it? I mean, that's the question of the century, or in 2 centuries. And not that it hasn't been done, but it's argued over immensely, especially by experts, right? People with big degrees who work in schools and write papers and magazine articles and advice from the Nutrition Academy and USDA and all those people, right? Lots to argue there. It's mainly on 2 sides, though. It's either simply just reduce calories, so calorie reduction, right? Low calorie diet, or change what and maybe how often you eat to affect the hormonal environment, which could also then lead to a calorie reduction. But the strategy is a bit more specific. It's not just eat less, but keep eating what you're eating and eat as often as you want. It's when you change what you're eating to not stimulate insulin as much, and you change the frequency or how often you eat, you can improve the insulin sensitivity, stop stimulating hunger hormones, start being more resensitized to leptin, so you feel satisfied, and you can create a calorie reduction without being hungry. Is if you just reduce calories without addressing those other factors, and you don't change your hormonal environment quite as effectively. So if you're hungry all the time, it's a whole lot harder to maintain a low-calorie diet. And then, you're just not happy. You're grumpy. You don't want to stay on it, and other people don't want to be around you because you're grumpy, and all you think about, talk about is food. Even though you're trying to eat less, lose weight, it's just you're no fun to be around at all. So you're not likely to maintain that, and you still have a hormonal environment that limits fat burning. So you're not accomplishing, you're not even getting the benefit for your suffering that you would expect, and it's short term. It's limited in its effect, and it's just not sustainable because of you're fighting your own hormones. You're fighting your own urges and drives, right? If you change a hormonal environment over time and create more time for stored fat to be accessed to supplement a calorie deficit, then hunger can be reduced, and you can be more consistent with the diet. Now that can take a few weeks to change, but really just a few weeks. You're talking about a few weeks to change, if you address it correctly, to change habits. And change the habits to allow for more consistency to maintain the weight loss and maintain the weight loss habits long term. Heal the hormonal environment, so prevent disease, let the organs heal, maintain, get back to the original function or level of function. And you have a sustainable plan that can take you all the way to where you want to go and help you maintain it. So my approach is the complete absence of nutrients is the best way to reduce insulin. There's nothing coming in. You have a period of time where there's nothing coming in. No protein, no carbs, no fat. You can argue fat doesn't increase insulin levels. Yeah, but it's still fuel that your body will burn instead of what's stored. So absence of all nutrients, macronutrients, is the best way to reduce insulin. Allow the liver to use up the fat, reversing the fatty liver, giving back some hormonal balance. Dr. Jason Fong been reversing type 2 diabetes for over a decade with a fasting protocol that's usually combined with a low-carb diet, of course. But he jumps right into the fasting, and it's often 48 and 72-hour fast a couple times a week, 2 or 3 times a week, depending on how long they're fasting, of course. He's shown that, and that's saying, I'm not saying that's the only way to do the fasting protocol, but it's an effective one that he has been, he's helped over 10,000 people with those diabetes over a decade. That's incredible. We need to pay attention to that. We need to look at that and learn from it and say how, again, yeah, ketogenic diet, that's not, insulin's not stimulated, but again, and fat and protein without carbs isn't that much effectiveness. Admittedly, keto can work. Again, please, keto, don't bail. Listen to me, and don't get mad at me, because I'm not criticizing you or the diet. I think it's great short-term therapy for the majority of people. Very few people can stay on it indefinitely. There are some, and I'm happy for you. You found it happy. You think it works for you. You're thriving on it. I wouldn't mess with that, but most people can't. It's a great short-term therapy for certain things. PCOS, absolutely. We can reverse insulin resistance. I just don't think it's a long-term solution. I think I would prefer to find something that has some basic habits that are easier to maintain, that is more of looks closer to what your long-term lifestyle would be, and just regulate degrees of fat. But it's not bad. You want to jump in and lose your weight with keto and then shift over? Fine. I'm not saying it's bad. And there's nothing wrong with a short-term period of intense effort like keto or like extended fasting. I just think that periods of fasting of at least 16 hours, I do it maybe 24 hours, a couple times a week, is just more effective. And then when you do eat, it's a little more like you can allow some of the carbs. You're not so worried about what your macros look like. You can eyeball your plate, say, I can have a portion of this size. I can fill most of my plate with fatty meat. You know, it's easier to manage. There's less measuring. There's less worry. Are my ketones high enough? And the tendency with keto, okay, please look at that, is complete discount of the effective fat. And what ends up happening is people eat more of the fat than they really need, which again is replacing fat that they should be burning from their body, stored fat. And many times they eat so much they're not creating a calorie deficit because they think it's eat as much fat as you want kind of rule. And some people said that. So I know not everybody takes that approach, but it's common. And if you want to eat, instead of telling yourself, no, I need to eat, no, I can just eat fat, which is the highest calorie dense macronutrient there is. So you can take in a lot of calories in your fatty coffee or in your fat snacks. Well, there's no protein or carbs, it's fine. It's calories you're not burning from stored fuel, which is generally the point of doing keto to begin with, is to access stored fat. And if you eat fat and then don't use it right away, you're likely to store it. It's like, I know, you don't have so much of it floating in your bloodstream for so long. And it doesn't need insulin to be stored as fat. You don't have to stimulate insulin to store fat and fat. It's just in the bloodstream, right? You'll store it. But you definitely want a low carb diet to limit insulin activation, to allow for more fat burning and to stop stimulating hunger as well, because carbs will stimulate hunger after blood sugar, right? And with keto people, too often people include the processed foods. They're labeled keto or labeled low carb too. It's not just keto that does that. They have some healthy label on them, marketing message. It's still a processed food. You know, it's called dirty keto for a reason. It's dirty. It's not whole food. These foods can be very calorie dense, nutrient poor, like most processed foods are. The ingredients list and the macros on the label may look acceptable, but they're still ground up, pressed together, and flavored to be palatable. Flavored to make taste like a real food, or even better. It's more stimulating for your taste buds. They may have had a lot of nutrient density before they were processed, but let's face it, processing, stick in a bag, a box, whatever. Come on. There's not much micronutrients left in there that you're going to assimilate that you need. It's definitely quicker to digest, which means they can have a greater impact on blood sugar and much less of an impact on satiety because they're processed. You've already got some of the digestion work done, right? They'll be broken down. They broke down. Get your bloodstream quicker. So there's just no comparison to whole food. Like you're eating a piece of meat and maybe a small piece of fruit or something like that, or some steamed veggie with butter on it or something. You know, it just can't be compared. And again, this is to correct insulin resistance for long-term health and weight loss. Now, if you're insulin sensitive, your diet can look similar to this pattern, but you have more wiggle room with carbs, right? Depending on your activity level, you have a little more wiggle room that you're gonna store some of that muscle. You're gonna, you use it up. It's not the same. When you're trying to turn the ship around, you gotta and reverse these hormonal dysregulations, this insulin resistance. You've got to do a little extra. And then you can when you get to your goal body composition or weight, however you want to set your goal for that, you've got the habits in place that you were doing before. Unlike a low calorie diet where you're not establishing new habits, you're just eating less. You've established new habits. You've established food preferences. And a meal frequency that works for you to burn more fat, and then you can maintain that with a little more wiggle room, not going off the rails. Right? Now, if you want to jump right into a 16-hour fast, 24-hour fast, great, go for it. All about it, get it. You're motivated to do that, you have the right mindset, go for it. If that's not the case for a lot of people, especially with insulin resistance, because it does stimulate hunger, and fat burning is more difficult to offset the fasted periods and the calorie deficit. So your habits may need to adjust more gradually. So here's my suggestion. Start with 3 meals a day that are compressed to within a 12-hour window. So you need a lot more than 8 to 10 hour fast, not a lot more, but 12 hours, so 4 hours. So basically you stop eating at 7 at night, you don't eat till at least 7 a.m. the next day. A 12-hour fasting window overnight, minimum. Okay, but 3 meals a day, no snacking. We eat meals. And we eat to satiety to the point to get us to the next meal. So whole food, prioritizing animal-based protein. So meat and eggs, right? Fish, true, yeah. Meat and eggs, so you get it. Because you're going to get the protein, you get the fat, you get all the micronutrients stored in those, the fat-soluble vitamins, other nutrients, choline, all the good stuff, right, is in the animals there, with few exceptions. But beef, lamb, fish, wild game, eggs, awesome, all wonderful. Pork and poultry certainly be included, depending on your preferences. Yes, there are those who say no, pork and poultry is too much PUFA, and they're not wrong, depending on how pristine you want your diet and what your goals are. But if you're trying to reverse insulin resistance and you're just trying to change your habits and maintain some consistency, and your goal is weight loss, start with some simple things. You can get your diet super pristine and work towards that. Okay. Don't feel if that overwhelms you. I can't have take it down a notch. Cut out the processed food. Cut out excessive carbohydrates and foods that tend to be mostly fat, and go with foods that are mostly protein that have fat. Because I don't recommend super lean meat either, because I don't think they get the satiety out of it. I'm not a big fan of like in the 80s and stuff, we were eating tuna out of the can, right? That was the bodybuilding, the weightlifting and diet thing. Eat tuna out of the can. It's like there's no fat in it. The flavor's not great. Or chicken breast. Ooh, and I know bodybuilders eat it. Chicken breast, broccoli, rice, more carb, low fat. For this, I don't recommend. That's just not going to be satiety. It's going to make you want to eat some carbs for energy. You got to have energy from somewhere. Fat is better, and tastier, and has more nutrients in it. The fat soluble nutrients, fat soluble vitamins, right? A, D, E, and K. If you're looking at, so go for the steaks, the chops, the ground beef. It's all good. Ground meat, minced meat if you're European. Protein goals. Okay, I don't expect you to measure every time, but figure it out at first so you can eyeball it. But here's your goal. So you can plug it into a food app of your choice, figure out what that looks like on your plate, and then go with that, right? At least daily. Okay, it's daily protein goals. 0.5 to 1 whole gram. So half a gram to a whole gram, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. If you go kilos, like everyone else in the world besides the US, 1 to 2 grams per kilo is a good ballpark, right? You can go higher than that if you want. You probably don't need to. That is not an upper limit. What that is a minimum limit. That's a lower limit. Okay, 0.5 grams per pound or 1 gram per kilo. That is not a goal. As if I hit that, I'm good. If you're starting out and you're not used to eating protein, okay, but know that that's a minimum. So if you aim for that, you're probably going to come up short often. You need to aim higher than that. Because when you're eating that goal, you aren't hungry for much else, right? You really aren't. You aren't hungry for much else. So take your weight, cut that number in half, minimum protein. And I'll give you an idea of what that looks like in terms of grams to how much you're eating, ounces, right? But plenty of naturally occurring fat along with that. So the fat that accompanies that meat or that egg, right? I just don't, losing weight, when you get down to goal weight, do what you got to do. I mean, do what you want to do, eat the fat. But losing weight, I don't like to add fat, excessive fat. A little here and there is fine, but lumping on extra fat just to add it, like unneeded calories. There's just not a lot of nutrient benefit from it. You're better off having seconds on meat, which is what I do. Big thing of meat, you might get more meat. A little avocado here and there, fine. Good potassium in it, which is also hard, sometimes hard to get from animal foods, right? Potassium, magnesium. Great from avocado or fruit even. Do you want a little cheese? Fine, a little bit of cheese. Don't overdo it on the cheese. It's not ad libitum, right? You can't have as much cheese. A little pat of butter, great. Eating sticks of butter, if you're at goal weight, again, that's your thing. You want to travel with butter, okay. But piling on or making a meal out of it, and you're trying to lose weight, you're just replacing stored fat. You're better off fasting. You're replacing fats that you normally be eating, and you're not getting a lot of nutrient benefit out of it. You're better off eating a hamburger fat. Because we do want to create a calorie deficit with little to no hunger. Fat is a high calorie food. It's not benign. It's not benign. Yeah, it doesn't affect that stuff. It's not benign. It's still calories you have to burn. You either burn it or store it. You're not gonna, doesn't evaporate. Yeah, you can breathe it out. Ketone people, yeah, it's gonna breathe it. You're gonna breathe some of it out. The majority of it, you're gonna have to burn it with activity or store it. And just, again, extra fat doesn't make sense to me when your goal is to lose fat. So the protein needs 6 grams. Okay, you're trying to get your grams to at least half your body weight or your whole body weight. And yes, I struggle. I'm going to admit to you, I know people that can eat their body weight in grams of protein, body weight number of grams of protein every day, no problem. I struggle to hit that number. I come close the majority of days when I'm fasting for 24 hours, right? But when I'm doing one meal a day, then yeah, I don't hit that, obviously. But you know, eating over 200 grams of protein a day for me, when it's whole food, it's hard. Yeah, if I supplement shakes and make it easier, but I don't know whole food. So 6 grams per ounce of meat. Okay. So if you get an 8-ounce piece of meat, that's 48 grams, or 6 ounces per egg. So 4 eggs, which is a good amount, right? 24-ish, 25 grams of protein there. So a pound of meat is about 100 grams of protein. Most people should make that their starting minimum daily intake, especially you're losing weight. Now, if you're a little 110-pound person, I'm happy for you. Obviously, 100 grams of protein, that's hitting your near top goal weight. You know, you're probably not trying to lose weight, right? 110 pounds, you don't have a weight loss issue. Maybe you're trying to trim off a few pounds, but that's not what I'm talking about. Majority of people who are really trying to lose weight, they weigh at least 150 pounds minimum, right? So 100 grams of protein, yeah, make that your goal to start. And if you're at 150 and 100 grams is if you're quite full, then you kind of filter in a few other things, you get great, you're close. You're very close. You're at 0.75, right? Whatever that is. But you make that your goal, a pound of protein. So it's like 2 meals, boom. You can give that 2 meals very easily. If you're eating 3 meals, breakfast, just protein. You want to keep insulin low, as possible, with the shortest duration of impact on an insulin. So it goes up a little bit and comes down quickly. So eat as little as you can get away with to get you to lunch for breakfast, okay? And it's just a protein food. It's meat or eggs. Nothing else. That's what I really think is ideal. Lunch, different story. Eat as much protein as you can eat. At least 8 ounces. Minimum. Go for 12. Go for a pound if you can. Work up to it. It may take you time. Me time. Let your stomach acid build up. It will build up over time. You'll be able to digest more. Your digestive system will adapt to it if you're not used to eating a lot of meat. At least 8 ounces though. If you want some other food on the side for lunch, make it whole food ideally. Could be fruit, could be veggies if you tolerate it, if you digest them well. I'm not telling you to eat them. I'm telling you not to eat bread, pasta, and a lot of grain stuff at all. Stay away from processed stuff. Stay away from grains, whole food. Okay? And not much fruit either, like one piece. No, ideally no more than 30 grams of net carb. So total minus fiber, right? But it's a piece of fruit or a little veggie, which has very little carb in it. Throw some butter on it, you're fine. Dinner, much like lunch, eat as much meat as you get, at least 8 ounces. Now, if you want something a bit starchy at dinner, in my opinion, go for a potato or sweet potato, so at least it's whole food, or squash, eggplant, something like that. Yes, they're nightshades, I know. Don't let me cross-eyed. It's not one size fits all. If nightshades bother you, don't eat them. I love nightshades. I eat them. I love tomatoes. I love peppers, onions, garlic. Wonderful. I don't have a problem with it. Yet, if I find I do, I'll stop eating. There's other, I get benefit from the flavor. I don't have any negative side effects. That's great. If you have more negative side effects than benefit, don't eat them. It's that simple. But again, limit it to 30 grams of net carb, ideally, not more than 50 grams. Especially if you had some at lunch, keep it to 30. If this is the only time you're having a starch or anything like that, any kind of extra carb, you can probably get away with 50. Below. The benefit, as I mentioned before, the fruits and veggies is that they have potassium and magnesium, which help keep your electrolytes in balance. Those minerals. We usually get plenty of sodium, but we keep a balance of potassium and magnesium to stay hydrated, to keep your heart rate beating regularly, like not out of rhythm, help with sleep. You just need them for lots of functions. And it's hard to get those from animal-based foods. It really is. Carnivores don't really need that side, all right? So it's hard to get those from animal foods in significant amount. Most of you are supplementing them, especially magnesium. And that's fine. If that works for you, great. I'm saying, fruit and veggies, great source of potassium, magnesium in a whole food form in a way that can, digest it, easily assimilated, bioavailable, and keep you hydrated. So you can hydrate with something like I use ReLyte, love it, especially on fasting days, but low carb all the time. I gotta use it every day to keep me from getting dehydrated, to keep my blood pressure up where it needs to be, because I'll just fluid will come right out of me, right? Especially when I haven't eaten. Summer, I get muscle cramps. It can raise cortisol levels, which I don't need help with. Throw off your sleep. Certainly don't need help with that. I've got enough issues to manage that. So those are important minerals. Get them in your body, whatever that looks like for you. Get them in your body. But I don't think an electrolyte mix in your water, as good as it is, okay, I love ReLyte. I use it daily. If I have my water bottle, it's got ReLyte in it all day. It's not enough for all of your needs. It helps get through the fasting period. It helps you keep from having the headaches and the dizziness. So, if you're not used to fasting, it helps keep the balanced sodium in your body. It's a great thing to do. It's not enough for most people. It's not enough. You still should try to get some from food or supplement in greater amounts. What do you cook with? Saturated fat. So if you're sauteing whether it's eggs or some veggies in there, hey, use a saturated fat, lard, butter, tallow, coconut oil, all awesome, right? There are many of those are like 40 to 50% monounsaturated fat, mono and unsaturated. Butter's like 65% saturated. Tallow's 40 to 50% mono and saturated. Coconut oil is like 90% saturated, so there's very little mono or PUFA in there. Lard has a little PUFA, maybe 14% PUFA. Tallow, even less than that, it's like single digits. Butter, single digits, PUFA, like 5% PUFA, if you're worried about PUFA. Olive oil and avocado, this question every time you want to post about it. It's like 75% mono. The other 25% split between PUFA and saturated fat. I just wouldn't cook with it on high heat. You want to throw some on something you're eating. Okay, certainly don't drink it. Like people try to get extra oils and fats. No, don't need extra liquid fat. But I tend to cook with lard. We have coconut oil and lard in our house all the time. You know, a little bit of tallow or duck fat for flavor. Duck fat's great too. Butter's around, but cooking, it's usually lard or coconut oil for us. And so monounsaturated fat, saturated fat, that's what you want. Something that's mostly mono and saturated with as little PUFA as possible, as it works for you, right? Saturated fats will have more of the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, and E, right? And they're less easily oxidized, which means they're more stable for storage, and they're more stable under heat when you're cooking. We're not going to oxidize, you don't have the oxidized fats, which is just inflammation. We don't need more inflammation. We're trying to get rid of inflammation, especially if you're insulin resistant. You've got enough inflammation. Less inflammation, they're stable fats, they're not going to be oxidized and causing free radical cascades throughout your body, right? Damage, age, basically aging you faster. Is that enough to dissuade you from using PUFA fats? Like, avoid the hateful eight in all cases. Whether it's eating, cooking, no one's going to eat these foods, these fats, these PUFA fats, straight up, because you put them on salad, they're nasty, they're rancid. Processing, storage, they're just unstable, they're oxidized. The hateful eight, don't know them: soy, canola, corn, cottonseed, safflower, sunflower, grapeseed, and rice bran oils. Again, poorly processed, easily oxidized. They're oxidized from the time you buy them. I don't care if they're, say, organic on them or not. Heat and storage makes it worse. Again, you get more inflammation, which started the problem of insulin resistance in cases to begin with, right? Or increases it, but it can lead, that inflammation can actually lead to insulin resistance. So there's plenty of evidence coming up now that needs to be reinforced. We need more studies about this. The inflammation caused by these easily oxidized oils, PUFA oils, in large amounts can actually cause some insulin resistance. Not just sugar. These oils, which we have way more of than we should right now. They're in every processed food, generally speaking. People don't realize how much soybean oil they're in. I'm saying, not you people, most of you listening to this, but general population, they think they don't eat soybean oil, they don't use it. They're eating it because it's in all processed food, or corn oil, or cottonseed oil. It's in the processed food they're eating. Into the box, bag, jar. I got those. Even your salad dressing says olive oil on it. Flip it over. I got canola. So avoid it even more so than carbohydrates. Yeah. If you're eating whole food, carbs here and there, like I mentioned, piece of fruit here and there, you're going to be fine. Avoid the oils. Get rid of processed foods in general. Even the healthy ones. Avoid fried food in restaurants. Go for grilled or raw. Right? Steamed. I mean, if you put any of these PUFA oils on your salad, try to eat it, again, they taste fancy. They're in your processed food, they're fried, and you stay away from them. You know what makes your stomach bloat up after you eat at a restaurant? That bloat you feel when you're just like, there's a balloon in your gut. It's those oils. It's those oils. So avoid those oils. Go for saturated, go for something that's solid at room temperature. Okay, ideally you want to sprinkle some olive oil on if you're eating salads, or avocado on a salad. That's fine. It's not hurting you. I just wouldn't. Yes, it's supposed to be good at high heat. You know, flip a little with it. I'd make something with it. If you're gonna use olive oil for the flavor, throw some butter in there with it. Why not? give it more stability. But here's the next step. You've done your 3 meals a day. You've changed the food that you're eating. Okay, so we've got a change of what you're eating and how often you're eating, which I mentioned early on. And what you're eating is very important. That's not going to change much at all. Next step, though, is the frequency. Skip breakfast 3 days a week for 2 weeks. So after you've been doing 3 meals a day without snacks successfully, in other words, you've avoided snacks for about 2 weeks, we're going to move to an intermittent fasting schedule, 16-hour fast, 15 to 16-hour fast, 3 days a week, whichever 3 days you want. I'd say days that'll keep you busy, not thinking about food, not being around food, not sitting in the kitchen, right? Don't go to the break room in the morning when the donuts are laid out at work, okay? 3 days a week for 2 weeks. You're going to skip breakfast and night. You're going to eat lunch and dinner, 2 meals. Yes, you can have coffee and tea and water and do much else. Coffee. Okay, again, keto people, we're not making, or anybody really, we're not making a 300-calorie coffee full of cream and instant tea oil, okay? I'd say keep that under 100 calories. That's hard to do with straight up fat. It's a tablespoon of cream. 100 calories is a tablespoon of instant tea. I'd keep it under that. I wouldn't do one tablespoon of coconut oil, as you don't know, but instant tea. So, yeah, 50 is enough. Just enough to take the edge off the black. Strong taste if you don't like it. But it's not enough to override or basically, you're trying to burn stored fat during that time. Why would you put 300 calories of cream and fat in your system? You're trying to burn fat. That's calories you can't burn. So we're creating 15 to 16-hour fast. Okay. And then between dinner the night before and lunch the next day, right? Then after about 2 weeks, move that to 5 to 7 days. Same schedule, but instead of 3 days, you're doing at least 5 days, if not 7, somewhere in there, find what works for you. Food choices stay the same. I would just increase the amount of protein foods, since you're doing 2 meals instead of 3. I would try to, at that point, you've been eating at least 8 ounces already, increase the amount of the meat that you're eating, or eggs, that you're eating, or a combination of the two. I would eat eggs for my 4 eggs and some liver and a bunch of meat. So increase the amount of protein you got to take coming in. If you're looking at macros while you're trying to figure this out, you don't need to eyeball your plate, or you just like plugging it into a food app to know what you're aiming for. Here's your tool. Here's your goal. Here's your numbers. You can adjust it. 50 to 60% is going to come from fat. Please don't get caught up on one number. 50. It's going to be fluid to some degree. These are ranges because you're not going to nail this down on. One app's going to tell you different than the other, here or there. 50, 60% from fat. 25 to 35% is going to come from protein. Maybe 10 to 20% from carb. Okay, depending on how you do this diet and how accurately you're counting it. But that's general ranges. Do it this way. Your appetite will, as you eat this way, decrease between meals, including the fasting period. You get where you won't miss breakfast at all. You'll naturally eat less because appetite's coming down, you're accessing more fat. Hormonally, you're adjusting, you're recalibrating, you're healing. Give yourself a few weeks for that to happen. Don't feel like just because you're hungry that something's not working. Give it some time to adjust. Okay. And then once that's stable, which you easily do in 5 to 7 days a week, the 16-hour fast, right? Breakfast and lunch only, big meals, mostly whole food protein, a little bit of food, something else if you want. Add in a 24-hour fast. And you can do it 1 or 2 days a week. 1 meal a day. So you just basically, whether it's dinner or lunch, I don't care what works for you. This will greatly accelerate your progress, not just in weight loss, but in lowering insulin levels and getting more insulin sensitivity in your system, right? Getting and more efficient at burning fat. Now, it may be more challenging on those days you're doing 24-hour fast, but you're making improvements. It's like think of it as a workout for your metabolism, for your fat burning. It's not just about the calories; it's also about the metabolic shift going on in your body to be more efficient at burning fat for fuel and enough of it, right, to satisfy you as you get through your day. Yes, you'll probably eat a bigger dinner. That's okay. Than you normally do. But you're not going to eat what you normally would eat in 2 meals or 1. That's not likely. I do recommend having that meal thought out, planned, prepped to some degree, because once you open the gate to start eating that day, it's like the horses are off and running. It's a very real possibility you start grabbing and eating anything within reach. It's just instinct. It's hormonal, especially if you're not used to it. Kind of have it prepped, as prepped as you can, and ready to eat shortly after you say, okay, it's time to eat. Bam, you have the right foods in place. So you're not just grabbing stuff out of your pantry, your fridge, whatever's there. Know ahead of time. Fasting insulin will come down over time. You have more stable blood sugar. And that this fasting days really make up for the things that slip through the cracks, which is normal for anyone's diet, anyone's plan. You're going to have stuff that slips through the cracks, either unknown or just uncontrolled. Like you had to go eat this place and you chose because of a business thing and you chose the best you could. Or you were with people, family, you didn't want to offend somebody. Things are going to slip through. Don't abuse it. Don't use the fast as a reason to abuse. Like I just fasted. I'm going to treat myself. You're just completely undermining it. I'm going to fast 2 days and then I'm going to have a big cheat day and eat pizza and ice cream. No, you're undermining it. You're fooling. You're lying to yourself. Honestly, at that point, you're lying to yourself. Your reward is your health. Now, you can find things that you enjoy on this diet. You enjoy these foods, right? You're not going to get this big dopamine hit out of them like you do from eating pizza and ice cream and stuff, but you'll enjoy it. Your reward, though, don't undermine the true reward, which is improved health, metabolic health. Now, some of you, I'm not saying you do, everyone will, but some of you may need meds during this time, as you and your doctor decide your discussion, right? Don't feel like you got to, be tougher than you need to be just to prove something. You're not here to prove anything. You're here to get to an end result. It's not about proving anything. Yes, the end result is not to need meds to regulate your blood sugar. If you and your doctor decide you need something to help with this or to help accelerate the process as you're putting these habits in place, and then you regulate that to see how much you need it, take it off when you're ready. That's the right way to approach it with medications. Many of you won't need it. Diet will be enough. But just monitor it. If you're your doc, this is the plan. I want to get off of these eventually. Let's use these to best help me stay consistent on this diet with these habits, and make sure you have a doc that's supporting you in this diet and habits and in your effort. That understands you want to be off of meds to regulate your blood sugar and have your weight where it needs to be, right? Now, add exercise as it makes sense for your schedule. Don't change your diet until you reach your goal body composition or your healthy ranges hormonally or whatever, you get close to goal weight. I wouldn't change your diet until you hit there. Notice, don't change your diet to benefit your workout schedule too much. I mean, you work around it like, oh, I'm going to eat after my workout. Yeah. Don't eat to work out. Don't start eating because I'm going to go work out. Or don't. You're going to lose weight. You're trying to change yourself metabolically. The meal frequency and the food choices are primary. Exercise is an added component to facilitate that, to accelerate it as a catalyst. Don't let the exercise corrupt your diet. Oh, I worked out hard, I'm going to have the smoothie now. Or I'm going to eat a little bit more because eat more protein. If you want to make sure you have that carb, that 30 grams, okay. Not 100. Keep the main goal. Insulin sensitivity, weight loss. It's a very simple plan. Be patient with it. Your hunger will decrease, so it's very sustainable. And again, it's the same habit you'll want going forward after you hit your goal weight and body composition and so forth. or get your blood work back in line, right? Mindset is important. Fasting is not punishment. It's a time for your body, to actually heal itself by breaking down damaged tissue and recycling it and regaining metabolic health, resetting the hormones, and getting more efficient at burning fat. If you feel that little gurgle in your stomach during your fast, right, drink some water, ideally with electrolytes, like ReLyte. I use ReLyte. I've got a link to it in my, I'll put a link in the show notes. You get 15% off. You want to give it a shot. It's also my Instagram profile. Stay hydrated, keep your blood sugar up, or blood pressure, not blood sugar, blood pressure up at normal levels. Okay. And reduces the lightheadedness and the headaches. Because when you feel low carb, if you've done low carb before fasting, you lose water. So one of the first thing that happens is you start losing this water weight. That can throw things off a bit. You can use some electrolytes in there. You definitely want some electrolytes. It's going to help you. Salt's important. You're not scared of salt. You're avoiding sugar, straight up sugar, liquid sugar, added sugar. You're avoiding that sugar. It's not in a whole food. But don't be afraid of that hunger feeling. It shouldn't make you panic. You're not dying. You've got stored fuel on you, right? You just want to access it better. That hunger feeling is transient. It's a hormone. It's just ghrelin saying, hey, don't we normally eat now? Or hey, blood sugar's a little low, stomach's empty. Do we want to eat? Because this fat is kind of hard for me to access right now. That's the whole point. You want to access the fat to offset the hunger, to offset the calorie deficit, to offset the low blood sugar, which we want, and the empty stomach. It will go away. It's transient. It will go away. Drink some water, go for a walk. Walking is great, mobilizes fat. And it may return. It'll go away. It might come back. It'll go away again. Tell yourself when that happens, hey, it's time to burn some fat. It just means it's time to burn some more fat. And you don't want to interfere with that, so you're not going to get in the way. You have a set time to eat. You know what that is, what those choices are going to be, and that's what you're sticking to. And your body's going to learn to burn fat on the other times. Again, it's this fairly simple plan. It's consistent with how you want to live, you're supposed to, ongoing after you hit your goals, but it'll get you where you want to go. It'll change things, not just weight loss, but hormonal balance, lower insulin levels, better, more efficient fat burning, healthier food because you're eating whole food, where there's bioavailable micronutrients as well as the macronutrients that you need. It's a plan for life. It's a plan for a longer, healthier life, for a greater health span, and that's what we want. Have a great week.